Today, I wanted to talk about fear. This is going to be a bit of an odd one, I imagine, but I think it's fair to say that all societies at all times have functioned somewhat on fear. It's usually the fear of the king and his men, or, as we've advanced in the West, one of the pretty beautiful things we managed to do was made people just afraid of the law instead, in which we could then adjust the laws through democracy and so on and so forth. Blah, 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 liberal theory. I'm sure
That's a nice fairy tale you've laid out for me there.
everyone's used to that. But it was better than just having the king and his men and us just being afraid of whatever they might do, which is obviously the case for much of the world still. And now we live in a different time. And I wanted to evidence this with an event that's taken place that's, well, been going on for a couple of weekends now. And I think has culminated in a tale which very much shows how much our society has degraded. So we'll start off with this link here, which is that you may have noticed this thing happened, which we sort of glossed over that was new, because of course there were the civilians who were killed and then a bunch that were abducted by Hamas in Israel. And for some reason, in a bunch of Western countries, Israeli groups and Jewish groups started putting up posters of the people who had been kidnapped with their names, faces, to try and gin up support for Israel. And that's pretty weird, frankly. I mean, it makes sense from a political perspective, to try and raise awareness and concern for what's going on, don't get me wrong. But that is still kind of weird. We don't usually have this. But okay. And the response is that some people have started taking them down, supporters of Hamas or Palestine, right? And, well, we now have to live in the fear of if you are the person who takes those down, you're going to be filmed and your life very much could be ruined. At least that's what we've seen in quite a few instances. And, okay, that's great. That's new. Fantastic. We now have to live in fear of if you don't like some posters that have been put up. Specifically only these ones for now, but let's not pretend that won't be expanded.
If you're anything like me, witnessing the gradual decline of Western civilization can really drain your energy. But if you want to get through the day with your sanity intact and keep a sharp mind as we wade through the ashes together, a good night of restful sleep is vital. That's why you need Rest Again. Rest Again is a natural supplement that contains 11 scientifically backed ingredients designed to get you to sleep and help you to stay asleep by working with your body's natural processes and not against them. Rest Again wants to ensure you get a great night's sleep and make sure to do this by sticking to doses of ingredients that have been shown to work and have not chosen the cheap option for you. Rest Again starts by supplementing the vitamins that your body needs to produce GABA and melatonin, the sleep chemicals, naturally, including vitamin D, B6, and magnesium. Then, Rest Again adds in herbal extracts like ashwagandha and L-theanine, which have been shown in scientific studies to help people get a better quality of sleep. And to top that off, Rest Again gives you what you need to get to sleep at night, not just after your body has started producing what it needs. That means an extra dose of melatonin and GABA that tells your body it's time to sleep. Rest Again doesn't claim to be magic and can't promise you that it will work for you, but if you're not getting the results that you're satisfied with, then Rest Again guarantees to give your money back. So if you're interested in improving your sleep, then click the link below and get 25% off.
And so I thought we'd just real quickly take a look at these posters, because, of course, I'm not pro destroying these. They're just like, whatever. I'm not a big fan of having political stuff in public if we can help it anyway, but these seem to be the least offensive things I've put up, or have been put up. I haven't put them up. As you can see here, the names of the people who have been kidnapped, a bunch of Israelis, 40 years old, 28-year-old, some kids, 9-month-year-old who's been kidnapped, and then just some local urban ladies destroying them. Okay.
You see local British women.
Yeah, of course. And you want to jump support for Israel? Go ahead. Yeah, you're right, whatever. And I think the situation with all this, not getting into Israel-Palestine, but instead just focusing on the conversation we've been having in the West, this has been really weird. Because, the whole conflict started off with the news for us, as we saw it, as a bunch of guys from Hamas broke into Israel and butchered a bunch of civilians and then stole a bunch of civilians as hostages. That's not a great way to start off an advocacy for your cause as the news cycle changes to the new thing, right? It's the perfect narrative for Israeli PR. And then, since then, Palestinian supporters all over the West, and explicitly talking about those in the West, have been caught chanting "Gas the Jews" in Sydney, storming airports in Dagestan. That was fun. And then we also have people throwing rats into McDonald's, along with the more normal chanting, I suppose you could call it, of them saying "from the river to the sea," which is, of course, a genocidal call.
Well, it was just funny that immediately after the atrocities had been announced in the news that had happened on the Israeli-Gaza border, that all of the BLM groups and other such, barely with any context, just immediately went, "Yes, we support this wholeheartedly, and we say that this is what decolonization has always been about, which is basically just
The
murdering random
the one that got
civilians."
me was those exact same leftists who spend like 99% of their time campaigning against violence against women were cheering when that Israeli German girl got gang raped and murdered on the back of a pickup truck. You know, it's the same people celebrating both sides of that.
The Western response is certainly something, and for people who don't know what I'm talking about with the rats, this is this here. Local man, urban man, colored some rats in with spray paint of the Palestinian flag, and then threw a whole bunch of them into a random McDonald's, so that the minimum wage workers have to deal
This
with
is
that.
how my side wins supporters.
Yeah, and then gives you a list of other things to target because we're the
Why
good guys.
why
So
rats with the Palestinian colours spray painted on them? This I'd seen this clip gone around without any
Successful mission.
context. I'm
don't want to listen to that.
very confused.
The thing is, those are those fancy rats. They're not like street rats. Those are like those fancy rats that you.
So someone spent a lot of money
Yes.
on those.
Yeah, that's
going
quite a
to-
lot of money. That.
Sure, but you could not make yourselves look more like the bad guys. To be honest,
Yes.
I think supporters of Palestine in the West have done the worst PR job possible. I mean, I've not seen anything from the Western guys that would make me even slightly support them. Been hanging out with communists. They've been doing gross stuff like this. They've been chanting "gas the Jews," which again, not exactly something that would put people on their side, right? And so now in the West, we have to live in fear of our neighbors acting well like insane people, throwing rats into the local McDonald's. Thanks, guys. Don't I love living in this neighborhood? And this reminded me of the situation we've had in the UK. The English Defence League, the EDL, they couldn't hold a single protest without an aggressive and large police presence. When the media also did everything they could to crush support for the EDL, the native advocacy group. As you can
I
They
remember
were
being.
often arrested for defending themselves against counter protesters.
I remember being in London once, and it's Speaker's Corner at the top of Hyde Park is where often where these protests take place. And I was going past there, and I saw there's a Tommy Robinson thing. He had turned up, and he was in the news or something like that at the time. Anyway, there was police all over the place. I mean, they came out really mob-handed to shut this thing down.
every single time. But that's not what happened with any of this, of course. And I'm going to focus on the posters specifically just for the sake of showing something. And this is where we'll start. So you can see here lots of accounts and lots of people who put up these posters were then recording people on their phones of people pulling them down. And this obviously being a way to try and shut down people who are doing this. They would get them fired, etc., or try and destroy their lives socially. We can see some more here. This is some local Black American women who've been doing that. So if they recognize us, let's recognize her. Sorry, DM us, and we'll see who these people are and contact where they work or whatever. You can see some university women here as well who decided that they would pull them down. This goes on and on. There's some more university women here. This in Boston University who are ripping them down. Again, here some more university women from New York University. Awful lot of women in all of this. Don't know why that is, but
Yeah.
seems to be an overrepresentation to normal political activity. Usually, women are kind of massively underrepresented in any political activity because they're not that interested. But this, don't know, but that was a thing. You can see some more here. Local lady, just putting them down. And it keeps going and keeps going. So there's another American woman. And here's some local boys. They were a dentist, apparently, this chap here. And as Visegrad reports, he is in Florida and lost his job after was recorded pulling those posters down. That's how
And that's the underlying assumption with a lot of this stuff, isn't it? Is the reason they're being filmed is because the person doing the filming takes it as given that society at large is going to be against this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that is a given in the West anymore.
Well, you look at these individuals doing it, and they've got a different perspective. They don't think they're going to be shut down. In fact, the Muslim part of the West seems to have massively held the line, as you might put it.
Yeah.
They don't care what you say about them. They don't care what they do, and they will support their own.
It might also be because they've gotten so used to the establishment being on their side.
Well,
Like those Harvard
Years.
students.
even when we're talking about physical violence, I mean, we saw at the protests multiple different people either flying the flag of the group that went out and killed people, flying their paragliders as a symbol of glory, or just saying what they did was fine, or was resistance or anything else. It's like, of all the ways you could argue for Palestine, this is not the one. This is the one to make me hate you because you're literally cheering on killing civilians there. But this group doesn't care. They don't need to. They held the line in their own community, so to speak, even when it comes to something as gross as killing civilians. And this brings us on to the event which I think, well, culminates all of this. The police taking part. This happened in a bunch of locations now, because these posters sort of became like a weird sacrosanct thing in the West for a small period, where anyone pulling them down would have their lives.
So British police are now pulling down posters of kidnapped Israeli civilians.
Yeah,
I think David Atherton here is actually being quite fair in how he's characterizing this by saying the police do not want community tensions inflamed because they obviously are becoming an inflection point for
But
divisions.
what would have happened to you and I if we had pulled down BLM protests
Well, of
posters
course.
2 years ago?
you would have been
police would-
inflaming community tensions, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Because you are a native, and therefore you are held to a higher standard.
Well, that's the underlying point here. So, I mean, I can see a lot of people are getting upset that the police have basically chosen a side. The police are coming down on the anti-Israeli side. They're coming down as pro Hamas on this, and I can understand a lot of the Jews and the Israelis are going to be upset by that. Imagine being a native Brit. We've had to have 25 years of knowing the police are against us.
And it's not uncommon. As you can
you're-
see, this is the Met Police also doing the same thing here. So it's not just Greater Manchester Police, it's the Police of London as well, pulling it down, and people making the point they're no longer impartial.
Callum's right. You're right to say that we're held to the higher standard because the assumption is always, and it's not entirely unfounded, that minorities, you could say it's cultural, you could say it's because they've been getting away with this sort of thing for so long, they know they can get away with it, are expected that if they see something that is even remotely against them, they're just instinctually, they get riled up.
They have no
can't-
impulse control.
Yeah, no impulse control. They can't control their emotions and they will have to commit violence or form some sort of mob or do something that will end up destroying a community. Whereas we are the ones who are.
Whereas if you're white British, you can have your girls raped for decades and the police can cover it up and you're just expected to take it on the chin.
Well, we'll go to the police's statement because, of course, they have released one to this because a lot of Jewish groups were taking pictures of them being like, what the hell? Why have you picked a side in this? Don't you know you're not meant to pick a side in such things? And the Metropolitan Police obviously have released all of this. I'm going to read some of it. They say local residents believed that the posters were put on specific shutters. It's not even true in the Greater Manchester one. That was a wall, so it doesn't even make sense. But they say in this incident in London, it was put on the shutters as retaliation for comments about the conflict on social media by the business owner. So presumably a Muslim supporting Palestine. Officers went to the shop and acting in good faith, they removed the posters to prevent any such escalation. We have a responsibility to take reasonable steps to stop issues escalating and to avoid further increasing community tensions. Oh,
Right.
That's what policing is, isn't it? It's the police living in fear of the local community. Instead, we're not of fear of the law. We're not of any of such things. It's not even to do with the subjects at this point. The police force, His Majesty's police force over here, they are the ones afraid of the community.
Not the native communities.
A new one.
Well, this is a direct result of the anarcho-tyranny that we've been living under when the government has been importing in masses of client groups for years and years and years. And the police for a long time in England haven't been acting as an operative of the law, as you say it, this disembodied rule set that we're all supposed to adhere by, where previously the original intention of the police was almost for them to be uniformed civilians, being paid to do what you would be expected to as your civic duty anyway. They're instead agents of the state. So what happens? They need to keep the state's peace and not our peace.
But that's the thing. Policing is not, apparently, the enforcement of the law to enable natural rights, which could include free speech. It's not ensuring safety of the civilian population. It's not what they've been engaging in. It's to avoid community tensions.
So that the immigration can keep flowing without hiccup.
But that's the point. It is for the diverse population. I mean, stopping anything that could rile up the diverse population.
Well, consider this. If these communities do break out into large-scale riots on a near constant basis, destroy their own communities and hurt those around them who aren't part of their communities, who might even be natives,
The diverse population isn't the problem. You are.
that gives us a lot of ammunition through which to criticize the government, doesn't it? And that's the real concern here.
But the way they see it is not we have to control the people who are engaging in crime. It is instead whoever has caused this to happen, which even if it includes correct criticism, that is the problem that needs to be removed. Because after all, these people in this specific population can't be expected to do anything else other than be violent, apparently. That is the mindset you have to come to this conclusion. And it's so crystallized in this specific example. The native population, such as we were talking about the EDL earlier, they are held to a higher standard. They can be demanded of not to engage in violence, and we will not remove anything that causes an upset for them. Instead, we will heavily police them and make sure they stay within the bounds of the law. That's why you have the aggressive and large police presence to anything the EDL did, even if it was just a peaceful protest. But when it comes to this population, instead, we have to remove the problem that's annoying them. And the whole point about, oh, this is because of community tensions, well, of course, we're talking about London. And there might have been something you remember quite recently, which was another event in which people put up posters on the shop shutters. And this was Indian businessmen who tried to detain a thief who was stealing from them. And the local black population, because the thief was black, decided to side with the thief and turned up, shoved things all over their shutters, including racist statements.
Does the man on the right with the beret, is that a black Hebrew Israelite necklace he's wearing?
That might very well be.
Yeah.
But that incident is obviously blacks versus Indians. It's not even to do with white British.
And I love the way that
And not a cowboy either.
the lens that they immediately put it through. They don't, because I mean, if somebody from your local town was caught stealing and there was a tussle, the question you'd ask is, well, did they do it or not? Did they steal? You wouldn't even you would immediately go to, did they actually do the thing that was the thing? Whereas with this group, they instantly go to, are they part of my group or not? And that's the only lens that they put this through.
It's tribal self-interest.
Yes.
And that's the population. That's one thing. But when the police come to it and ask the same conversation, which is, which group's more diverse? Well, in this case, which group is more diverse? That word that doesn't mean what it says. Well, it's the black population, not the Indian one, is it? They're the ones closer to the whites. It's closer to whiteness, as of course it's put through the phrase.
Well, in their mind, this photo is 100% diversity, because diversity means non-white. It doesn't mean anything else.
But even when we're dealing with Indians versus black, there's no white people here.
Yeah.
Well, we have to use the lens of critical race theory of what's closer to whiteness, and that's the Indians, isn't it? It's not the black population. So they were able to engage in something the police are now saying is totally a crime because that's inflaming community tensions. But these guys turning up and putting racist statements against Indians on an Indian shop, that's not inflaming community tensions. They do not care about rule of law. They do not care about whether or not you should be afraid of the king and his men. It is all them being afraid of whichever community they happen to be dealing with today. And this is what a Western country can be correctly defined as at this point, from an outside perspective looking at it. It is a place in which everyone lives in fear of the violent, diverse elements. Even the police fear them, as the example was given there with the Palestinian protesters. Whichever group is willing to be more tribal, violent, or unreasonable, that's the group that rules society in that local area. That's an incentive structure which is a complete race to the bottom. That is not going to build or sustain a society that's worth living in. Instead, it is one that incentivizes the place to get worse and worse. And this is why the police have ended up in this bottom.
Might you say that it incentivizes the race to everywhere becoming a third world S-hole?
Well, if your idea of a wonderful society is one where the police pick sides in your local ethnic conflict, decide which one's more diverse and then defend them, that's not one I would pick. I would pick one where we have the rule of law.
The West has a genuinely rare mindset when it comes to sort of governments and societal cohesion, all that kind of stuff. It is that of reciprocity and is that of individuality, and it works by saying, we're going to judge everybody by a standard. We're going to treat other people as we should be treated ourselves, and it works, and it did work in Northern European societies that were largely homogeneous. But what we then started doing was started importing people from places where they think purely on tribal lines. They think purely on family. And that's why you started getting, you can walk into a chain shop in this country now and you'll notice that everybody's the same of ethnicity. It's not necessarily all the same in all the different shops, but basically you get one manager in and then he only hires from his group. So we've got an incompatible software running in the minds of the people that we're bringing in. And so at some point, the white population is going to have to go, either I'm going to get outcompeted on everything or I adopt this mindset.
I would say not outcompeted, because that suggests that it's based on merit. It's based on nepotism, is what you're describing there, the in-group preference.
I don't want to get into a whole conversation about ethnic aspects in that regard, but when it comes to policing, because there's a natural response. Okay, well, the national government has decided that we're going to have mass immigration. What's the natural response to that? Well, as a police force, you can implement the rule of law fairly on whoever you want. Or you can do what the British police have done for the last 20 years, ending in this result here, which is prioritizing, as they put it, community tensions. I mean, it's just a complete race to the bottom. There's a reason why British society is uniquely damaged when it comes to incidents like this, even compared to Europe. But I'll end this off with something, which is that, well, could you even keep the society going? And we have some data on this, thanks to Denmark. Their government decided to release some data on, well, why do Danes turn against immigration? And the answer was because it doesn't pay for itself. It literally can't afford the society it lives in. I mean, you can see an image here of just average Danish street, I presume. And they have a image in here. I don't know if you can zoom a little bit.
This is one of my favorite graphs ever.
It's complicated. Denmark's average net contributions to public finances by age, and then they have it broken down by, well, I suppose, ethnic group. They have those of Danish origin. Once you reach about 30 or something, you've paid your debt and you're now contributing to the public purse, and then you'll take it off when you get to about 60 and become a drag on the system, right? Other Western immigrants, okay, it's a bit of a lack, but they still pay for themselves. The specific data on here, I think that the Dutch were the ones most likely to put the most money in, and then the United States, etc. And then you've got other non-Western immigrants, where it's just not really worth it. That's a net drain in its entirety, except a little period where you get some more money into the purse. And then you have, as they put the system here,
Middle East and North Africa, Pakistan and Turkey.
where at 0 point will you ever get a net contributing, and over the lifetime of the people you have brought in there, you lose a huge amount of cash.
So the title is it's complicated, but actually that is as
very
clear a signal as you will ever get on a.
Because another thing to take into consideration is here, even with the other non-Western immigrants who are making a contribution, even a small contribution, for a brief period of about 20 years, maybe 30 years in their own lives, they will be coming over, and because of incredibly lax immigration laws, they will probably be bringing over the rest of their family, most of whom exist in the extreme ends of that bell curve there, which means that they may be a small contributor by themselves, but they are bringing in a massive drain.
Well, there's a broke down version of this, of all places, on the Reddit thread for Europe, as you can see on the subreddit. And they have it broken down by country of origin as well. And as you can see, the Netherlands being the biggest contributor of people who are non-Danish.
Is that Somalia at the bottom?
It is indeed. You have the United States, France, Germany, so forth. And
it's impressive. It's always the Somalians who are at the bottom. Same in the social housing in London. 72% of the Somalians are in social housing.
Even though you get those people at roughly about their 20s, so you don't have to pay for their upbringing, and then they should be the most productive at the time you're getting them. We have, as you can see there, the ones taking the most over their lifetime, Somalis, Syrians, Libyans, Iraqis, and Afghanis. So the people most likely support Palestine in this case, the people you see who won't go to Palestine, will never move there. Instead, they come to Europe for some reason that they're never able to answer, except you have money. They literally can't afford the society they're living in. The data is solid on this.
Wonder why your taxes are going sky high recently? Well, a lot of it is this.
The more important thing to me, because this is Danish data, coming back to the UK and our status of policing, is that these people apparently can't even afford the society they live in, and yet they're the ones that the police are most afraid of. They are the ones that they fear instead. And maybe the West will just keep chugging on in some form. But there's no reason to even do any of this. I mean, as people have rightly pointed out, this is the West committing its own suicide if it carries on down that path of, trust me, bro, more migrants equals more good. Do not investigate the data at all.
I've already written off France and Germany. There's some question to mind as whether this country can survive.
Well, once again,
but the end point being that, do you want to live in a society which is solely based on fear of little communities instead of the law? I think the law would be a much better way to run, well, anything. If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Symposium series, this episode on whether or not Western societies can survive. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.